Greetings, dear friends. Welcome to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery. I'd like to begin by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome again, dear friends, and thank you for joining the live stream. And a warm welcome to everyone who joins later on to hear this teaching. So I've chosen a theme for this talk today, sharing on Dhamma, the theme of fire contemplation. And there are many ways in which the Buddha spoke about fire, the fire element as a contemplation, and also he gave many similes relating to fire and broad teachings around how we can relate to our everyday lives in skillful ways, using fire as an analogy, a simile for us. So I think I'd like to begin by speaking about the fire sermon, because this is a really amazing teaching that the Buddha gave very early on, as many of you will know, in his ministry. After he became the Buddha, he'd been practicing as the Bodhisattva in this part of India near Bodh Gaya. There are some caves, they're still there today, in a small range of hills near Bodh Gaya. And the Buddha spent 6 years doing the very extreme austerities, ascetic practices, before he decided this may not be the best way forward. And he had his 5 companions with him, but also across the valley there's a hill near a small town called Gaya, and even to this day the hill is still there, the town of Gaya is still there. And on this hill there was a group, actually 3 groups of ascetics who were all practicing spiritual practices also, and they were like a neighboring groups of ascetics, and the Buddha may have had some connection with them during those 6 years. Very likely he did, because he would have gone in to Gaya for alms as they would have done. And we're told in the suttas, there were these 3 groups of fire-worshipping ascetics who lived on Gaya Hill. The 3 Kassapa brothers led these 3 different groups. One group comprised 200 or so ascetics, another group 300, and another group 500. So altogether, there were 1,000 of these fire-worshipping ascetics living on Gaya Hill, near where the Buddha was practicing, or the Bodhisattva was practicing. And after the Buddha became the Buddha, he went to Sarnath, taught his 5 companions who'd been with him for all those years of austerities, and then he came back to the region of Bodh Gaya again, and he visited these fire-worshipping ascetics, and he taught them the Dhamma. And so this sutta, the fire sermon, is really in the context of the Buddha teaching these fire-worshipping ascetics how to consider a more fruitful way of practice for liberation. Even today in India, there are many fire-worshipping ascetics Brahmins who keep, a sacred flame going over long periods of time, and their practices around watching, sustaining, making sure that the flame doesn't go out, and basing their practices around this attention to the object, this flame. I remember going to Varanasi and spending time at the burning ghats, where people from all over India bring their departed loved ones, because it's such an auspicious place for cremation on the banks of the river Ganges. And people want to be able to take the bodies of their loved ones to this sacred site. And they have big funeral pyres built of wood, and it's a constant stream, as those of you who've been there will know, corpse after corpse, coming to the banks of the Ganges onto these burning ghats and being consumed by flames. And these flames are lit by one of these eternal flames that is kept by the priests, by the Brahmins, in a temple near the burning ghats. And all the funeral pyres are lit from this sacred flame, sacred fire. It's a great honour and privilege to be able to go and pay respects to this flame, this fire, to see the Brahmins who tend the flames. And so these, back in the time of the Buddha, these 1,000 fire-worshipping ascetics were doing similar practices and tending to fire, contemplating fire, and no doubt, learning a great deal from these practices. But when the Buddha returned to the area and sought them out to teach them the Dharma, he gave them a different way to practice. And in order to, connect with them, to really meet them, he gave this fire sermon. And being the Buddha, he didn't hold back, he didn't mince words, he explained to them, look, if you really want to know about fire, if you really want to know what's burning here, then pay attention to the eye, to the ear, to the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. Pay attention to their objects, the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, and thoughts. Pay attention to the consciousness that receives, that knows, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Pay attention to the contact that happens in order for consciousness to arise. The eye, the object, contact between the two, and then eye consciousness arises. And the same with the other 5 senses, and also with the mind. Pay attention to this, the Buddha said, and see how this is burning. Every aspect of this experience of sensory input is burning. What is it? Why? What is it burning with? Why is it burning? It's burning, the Buddha went on to say, with the fires of greed, of hatred, and of delusion. So the 3 core defilements, greed, hatred, and ignorance, are the cause of this conflagration. And so the Buddha said, this is the fire that you need to pay attention to. This is the fire that you need to learn about in order for the fire to be extinguished. Let it go out. And these fire worshipping ascetics could really receive this teaching from the Buddha, and they all became bhikkhus. And so then there were 1,000 new bhikkhus in the world. And so this sort of mass conversion happened, if you like. And rather than tending to the sacred flames, I imagine that they simply would have allowed them to go out and contemplated that and then turn their attention inward to see where the work is really needed to be done. So this is a very beautiful sutta, and it's a profound sutta. And there are many other instances in the Pali Canon where the Buddha is describing our experience as a conflagration, a burning. We're burning, until we stop. And indeed, the word nibbana, the goal of the spiritual life for all of us, means cooling down. It's a word that was a common household word at the time of the Buddha. To nibbana, the cooking, simply meant to leave the cooking to cool down, perhaps before eating it, to let things cool, to let the heat escape. And so this is our goal, to cool down. To cool down what? To cool down the fires of greed, hatred and delusion, these energies that make us hot and bothered, feverish energies. So we can really consider this. There's a sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, number 23, called Vamika Sutta, the Anthill Sutta. And in this sutta, the Buddha gives us the simile for this mind and body, this experience of the six senses, the experience of the five khandhas, the five heaps of experience, the body, perceptions, feelings, mental formations, and consciousness. Another paradigm, all the six senses, to consider all of this experience as like an ant heap. But like an ant heap, these bodies and minds, termite mound. A termite mound, as many of you will know, if you watch a termite mound, it's this thing, this mass of sand or dirt, and it's full of little tunnels, and it's heaving with life. All these tiny insects scurrying around inside it, building, excavating, living their lives, whole communities living in this pile of sand or earth. And the Buddha compared our experience of mind and body as like an ant heap. And he said, this termite mound, it flames by day, it burns by day, and it fumes by night. So burning by day, flames and fire by day, and at night there's a less heat, but there's a smoking kind of, what's the word, like glowing charcoals, smouldering by night. And again, we can pick up on this sense that from the perception of a Buddha, from the experience, the insight of a Buddha, looking around at those of us who are still enmeshed, mired in samsara, it's as if we're on fire. We're burning with desire, burning with aversion, burning with confusion. It's hot. They've done experiments on the minds of, or I should say the brains of people who meditate. And many of you will have heard of this. There's studies going on in Italy and probably other places where they put a whole load of electrodes and monitoring equipment of different kinds around the heads, bodies of people who've been meditating for, many years, seasoned meditators, get them to sit and meditate, practice samadhi or vipassana, whatever, meditation, loving kindness, all different kinds of methods of meditation. And then they measure what's happening in the body, what's happening in the brain. And one of the findings that I'm aware of from studies that were done in Italy not so long ago is that actually the heads of people who meditate, while they're meditating particularly, cool right down. There's a lot less heat being produced up here when meditating. And that's very interesting. Perhaps many of us might have a sense of the cooling effect of meditation and the quietness of the mind and the stillness of the body and the enabling of peaceful states, focused, still, relaxed. And so there's a coolness that comes in, and this is measurable. And how often when we meditate, we find we want to put on a blanket or a hat because we're chilling. We're cooling down. Meditation is cool, friends, isn't it? And so this simile again, the simile of the ant heap, is something to really contemplate. The hive of activity and how hot and how bothered, how feverish it can be. And then we have the opportunity to, in seeing that, in perceiving the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, we can observe them also finding their rest and coolness, the freshness and the coolness. This reminds me of my teacher, Lumpur Ganha in Thailand, who's said to be a fully liberated person for many, many years now. And he would describe himself as someone who has AC heart, air conditioning in the heart, cool. Even in the heat of Thailand, he could experience coolness within. So these are ways in which the Buddha spoke about fire to really help us to understand what is our situation, because when we're in the midst of the conflagration, we may not necessarily recognize it, feel it. And so we need to have it pointed out to us in order to begin to open to the possibility that there's a different way of being. So I put a few references for you in the chat, and I've spoken about the fire sermon and also Wammika Sutta Majjhima 23. I'd like to speak a little bit about, Majjhima number 1 and also number 49, these two suttas. Very profound teaching in Majjhima Nikaya number 1, the very first middle-length discourse, where the Buddha is inviting us to see things in their true nature, see things as they really are. And he points out in this sutta, which I'm going to really just speak generally about, he points out that the things that we perceive, we very quickly, on seeing a sight or hearing a sound, we very quickly add to that experience. We color the experience, and we'll do that through a kind of an imagining. And the imagining that happens, that adds to our simple experience and embellishes it in different ways, is a product of our conditioning. It's a product of past experience. It's a product of the coloring that comes about through our leaning into desire or away from aversion or rolling around in confusion. And so the Buddha, in relation to fire in this sutta, just as an example, invites us to see fire as fire and not to imagine, particularly not to reify, not to make it me or mine or myself. So anything that we relate to, actually anything at all, can we notice how quickly the tendency to create a relationship between that object and myself comes in? Can we notice how quickly we add to the experience? In the Majjhima number 1, the Buddha gives us examples of this tendency, absolutely everything we could experience through the sense doors, the khandhas, the body, the mind, the elements of air, water, fire, and earth, and all the different planes of existence, all the different ways in which we can experience samsara, from the hell realms all the way to the realms of the gods. All of these experiences are coloured, and there's a spin on them. They're tainted with imagining. And the Buddha asked us in this sutta to point particularly our attention to how we will relate to our experiences, myself, or somehow belonging to myself, or that I'm somehow in the experience, or that there's some kind of relationship between myself and the experience. So the self comes in. And the invitation in this sutta is to strip all of that away and just experience what's actually happening in whatever aspect consciousness is arising. In the hearing, there's only the hearing. In the seeing, just the seeing. Fire is simply fire. Air, simply air, and so forth. So this is a very profound and really fascinating sutta, and an invitation to us to keep letting go of whatever we think we know, however we think things are, however we relate to things, just to keep letting go of all the perceptions, of all the views, of all the sense of understanding, anything at all, just to keep letting go and to simply be present for the experience itself in the moment. So from this perspective, this way in which the Buddha again and again taught us to see the Dhamma, we can see how then in another sutta, Maha Hatipatopama Sutta, which is Majjhima number 28, the Greater Elephant Footprint Sutta. Here the Buddha, actually Sariputta, is teaching about the four elements and explaining how we can investigate and contemplate these four elements. So I think I'm going to screen share at this point to show you the teachings in relation to the fire element in this sutta. So just bear with me while I share screen. There we go. And so here the Buddha says, what is fire element? The fire element may be interior or exterior, internal or external. What is the internal fire element? Anything that's fire, fiery, and appropriated, that's internal, inside, pertaining to an individual. This includes that which warms, that which ages, that which heats you up when feverish, that which properly digests food and drink, or anything else that's fire, fiery, and appropriated, that's internal, pertaining to an individual. This is called the interior fire element. The interior fire element and the exterior fire element are just the fire element. This should be truly seen with right understanding, like this. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. When you truly see with right understanding, you grow disillusioned with the fire element. Nibbida arises, detaching the mind from the fire element. Viraga, detachment, arises. So again, we have this teaching from the Buddha pointing out how we will tend to create on top of the reality, the simple reality that we're experiencing. And here there's an invitation to consider, what is fire? How do we experience fire? Simply this characteristic of the material world is that of temperature, hot or cold, and everything in between. The fire element is that which relates to temperature and relates to processes like the digestion in the body. It's like when we eat, isn't it? We're putting the food into a kind of a furnace that is the stomach. It produces heat, it produces acid, it burns up the food. And so we receive the energy that's released from this process. There's also the aspect of fire element of aging, the aging of the body. It's consuming quality of fire that is burning up. It's a slow burn in relation to the aging process, but there is this way in which there's a breaking down of these bodies, and this is fire element at work. The fire element internally is no different, as the Buddha tells us, from the fire element externally. There's nothing more personal here than over there. How interesting to really take this on board and contemplate this. The sun, this vast furnace, incredibly hot, vast ball of fire, and all the other stars in the universe are fire element predominantly. And isn't it so that this sun enables life to exist on this planet, and how it's not so difficult to appreciate why people would worship the sun. It is the giver of life, the giver of life, the giver of light, the giver of warmth, fire element, and our great friend, like a god for us. And this is a pure expression of fire energy, if you like, but it's the very same fire element that warms this body, that gives this body its heat, gives it this ability to digest, and the feel of temperature, of hot and cold. These are all manifestations of fire element that we can contemplate, consider, and actually feel out. So this is one of the many contemplations the Buddha gave us, to consider fire element and to study it, investigate it, understand it, learn from it. There's also aspects of fire element, one could say, in the mental realm. We could consider certain energies in the mental realm as fiery, qualities such as enthusiasm, intuition, curiosity. These are kind of, they have a momentum that relates to the fire element, one could say. You may disagree. This is really just can say not so important point, but it's quite interesting to consider how also the defilements are, in some ways, some defilements relate very much to this fire element, fire energy, passion, sexual desire, lust, anger. There are certain emotional qualities that really express heat and this kind of burning quality. And all of this we can investigate. It can actually be quite helpful if we're overcome by, say, anger, to recognize, okay, just to feel out, what's happening in the body. And oftentimes, if I'm really infuriated by something, there'll be a feeling of heat. There's even a sense of burning, a sense of a fire in the belly or in the chest, in the head. There can be an element of temperature involved. In anger, we get heated. We can go red in the face, and the same with sexual passion. There's heat involved. So all of these ways in which we can consider fire element, friends, and remember the Buddha's teaching that none of these elements, fire, air, water, or earth, space and consciousness as well, none of these elements are in any way personal. They're qualities of the material realm. In the case of earth, water, fire, and air, they're aspects of materiality. These four make up all of the material realm. And we may experience some pieces of this material realm as here, in this moment, as my body, my piece of the material realm. But actually, isn't there just such a constant interchange going on? It's so fleeting, this body in this moment. The next moment, it's different. Things will have changed. These bodies are constantly flowing and changing. There's nothing static about them. And of course, they're aging. We're feeding, we're urinating and defecating, we're sweating. We're constantly rubbing these bodies and they're replenishing themselves in every moment. And so this body isn't the same even for a moment. It's like the water in a river flowing on by. There's nothing we can hold on to and make it personal, make it mine. And so these contemplations are really valuable for us to connect our contemplation of these four elements, these four aspects of the material world with our understanding of this characteristic of not self. Allow ourselves to incline towards letting go of the sense of self in relation to the material world. And so, just focusing on the fire element, we have many ways in which we've been invited in this sutta, Patipadopama Sutta, to consider fire element internally and externally, and how it's all the same fire element, and how does it manifest in this body? How does this experience of fire element feel? What can I understand? What can I investigate here in relation to fire element? And the Buddha gave a very profound invitation to keep developing this sense of not self, not me, not mine, around our material experience. I'd like to speak about one more sutta, which is the Maharahulawada Sutta, which is Majjhima number 62. This is a very touching sutta, and the Buddha had a son, Rahula. As many of you know, he became a bhikkhu at a young age, became a samanera at the age of 7, and started practicing. And when he was a teenager, he was with the Buddha on one occasion, walking for alms, to do the alms round, walking behind the Buddha. And the commentary to this sutta tells us that, or speculates that quite possibly Rahula looked a lot like his father, very handsome, young man, and he had a certain degree of conceit or vanity around his appearance. And the Buddha wanted him to let go of this selfing, the sense of self around his relationship to the Buddha, around his physical attractiveness, health, youth, vigor, so on. And so the Buddha invited Rahula to consider the elements, and that none of his experience is to be held as personal. And this teaching the Buddha gave over the course of a day to his son is one in which he describes in detail these 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and air. And he invites Rahula to let go of the sense of self around them. And I'd like to share, screen share, a little bit of this teaching to highlight what the Buddha said to his son as a way of contemplating when we are in danger of getting caught up in reactivity. So let me show you here. We have this teaching then from the Buddha, having described the elements to his son, invited him to contemplate the elements. He then goes on in relation to fire to say to Rahula, meditate like fire. For when you meditate like fire, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. Suppose a fire were to burn both clean and unclean things, like feces, urine, spit, pus, and blood. The fire isn't horrified, repelled, and disgusted because of this. In the same way, meditate like fire, for when you meditate like fire, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. So this is a really beautiful teaching. Again, it's the sense of don't hold on to experience and make it me or mine. Don't invest experience with self. But also by extension, if we're in a situation where somebody's abusing us, somebody's threatening us, something offensive or difficult is happening for us, can we be like fire? Fire that doesn't kind of have any opinion whatsoever about the fuel that's thrown onto it. Whatever kind of fuel, however filthy or disgusting, the fire is going to treat it all the same and just burn through. Can we have the same approach to experience? Can we be so kind of hands off around our experience of samsara from moment to moment that we don't get caught up and heated? We don't start burning in relation to what's happening around us or within us. And this is a really helpful teaching. And in this sutta, which I thoroughly recommend you read, the Buddha compares also all the other elements in the same sort of way. Their impersonal nature, their absolute non-reactivity, their dharmic unfolding. Air is just air, it just blows through things. Water is water, it's liquidity, it's cohesion, it flows. And earth is earth, it's solid. It's the solidity, it's the weight, it's the substance in the material realm. Just that, nothing more. When we investigate these elements, fire, water, earth, and air, we can learn so much about impartiality, about equanimity, about letting go, about being part of nature, simply manifesting, simply experiencing what is to be experienced in each moment without making any more of it, without adding moments together and creating some kind of story. As soon as we do this, we are caught up in delusion. Mara's got us by the throat. We're confused. And so there is the sense when we consider the elements, speaking today about fire element, when we really consider, contemplate fire element, it's like an invitation to come home to the simple reality. Just this much, no more. And there can be no views or opinions about the elements, the sense doors, the sense objects, about the body or about the mind when we're truly present for what happening for the reality of each moment. There's really no space for the mind, the brain to heat up. There's no room for the fire, the burning anthill to be burning and smouldering away. Everything can cool down because there isn't any argument with reality when we're truly present. We're immersed then in simply being, knowing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. That's all that's happening. There's nothing else. There's nothing leading to anything else. There's just this. So I hope these contemplations of fire, the fire element, and the Buddha's teachings, also the fire sermon and the Wammika Sutta, the anthill teaching, I hope these contemplations can be helpful and always an invitation to investigate the Dharma, each one of us for ourselves, for liberation. Ayya. So thank you for your patient listening, and I'm going to have a look at the chat and see if there's any comments or questions to add to our investigation here. And thank you very much for your kind greetings from all around. Someone says here they know the fire sermon. That's wonderful. The fire sermon is a really good one, along with Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the first teaching of the Buddha, turning of the wheel of Dhamma, and Anattalakkana Sutta, this teaching on non-self. These are the first and second teachings that the Buddha gave. And then Adittapariyaya Sutta, this fire sermon, is the third recorded teaching from the Buddha from the very beginning of his ministry. And these teachings are so powerful. The first utterances of someone who's woken up as a Sammasambuddha, fully realized person, realized through their own efforts. These three teachings are really worth learning. Reading again and again, but even better, learn them off by heart. Learn them in the Pali, chant and recite them, learn them in the English, and in that way you get to learn Pali and to really allow them to come into the heart. And in the monasteries we'll recite, chant these suttas again and again, and they are enough, they cover all the bases, but how wonderful it is we have so many other teachings, but these core teachings I so recommend. Learn them, get them off by heart, recite them, learn the Pali, and just immerse in these teachings. Have a comment here from Dharmika. Thanks, Dharmika. Says namaste. How to meditate in very hot, sultry atmosphere. Sweat will be falling down into eyes, mouth, etc. Yeah, quite, Dharmika, indeed. What a great opportunity to contemplate fire element. In such occasions, when we're cold, when we're hot, then fire element is obvious and it's difficult to ignore. So why not pay attention to how does it feel? What is this heat like? I spent many hours in India sitting in cells, in Goenka centers, just sitting and sweating. The sweat running down the back, everything damp, moist, sticky, and contemplating that. Contemplating how in a hot climate we're not constantly feeling hot, are we? But there's a kind of waves of heat that come and go. A wave of heat will arise, I'm really hot, and then the sweat will increase, and then there's a slight cooling, and then the heat recedes a little. I can even feel a bit chilly sometimes, and then the next wave of heat comes. So we can contemplate the nature of fire and how it's changing constantly. It's never the same for any 2 moments. There's a flow within the fire. There are flames coming and going. It's a constantly changing flame, There's no two flames the same. Watching a candle, what a great way to contemplate fire, to watch a candle and see how it slowly, inexorably burns away until the fuel is exhausted. What a great simile for the spiritual path to Nibbana. What a great contemplation for us. So yeah, how to meditate in a hot, sultry atmosphere, challenging and great opportunity to contemplate fire element. Thank you, Dharmika. Also in winter, Dharmika says, at lower temperature, indeed, let's contemplate cold as well. And of course, if it's really cold, we want to take care of the body and put some coverings on and, be cozy and warm, be comfortable for our practice. So we can sit for, as long as we are able to. But we can still, when there are situations where the body is cold, the body's chilled, shivering, isn't it interesting how the body will automatically start moving in order to warm itself up, to generate heat. Contemplating the cold is also contemplating fire element. How does it feel to be really cold? Which parts of the body are particularly chilled? We can notice how the hands and feet will be, perhaps the coldest, the tips of the ears. We can notice the parts of the body that are generating heat in order to keep us alive, and so forth. I wouldn't recommend kind of going into freezers and just for the opportunity to contemplate this aspect of the fire element, but nevertheless, there will be times when we're assailed by cold, and we can make that an object of investigation. Thank you, Dharmika. Astrological fire element, very interesting, Norma. Yes, there are, we could say, types of people. In the old systems of medicine in the West, they spoke about different kinds of people. And I think in Ayurvedic medicine, there's the same concept of some people being very fiery, having a predominance of fire element, other people very watery, people very earthy, people very airy. And in the astrological system, which is a kind of an ancient wisdom, there are these 4 different kinds of people. Different signs have different elements associated with them. And we can really see how within our own mind and body, we can observe the elements playing out. When I'm very upset, grieving, mourning, a loss, water element will manifest, tears streaming, a heaviness in the chest, a flow of grief can be felt. When I'm angry, as I said earlier, that energy of anger or passion, fiery energy. There are those kinds of people who are prone to anger, prone to irritability, and others are not. Others are more placid. We can observe these things both internally and also externally in the people around us, in animals around us, in other beings, in the weather. We can observe these elements playing out and the balance between them, which changes constantly. And so, yes, there are many ways in which we can consider these things, not to make things more complicated, not to add concept after concept into the mix, but rather to always allow these ways in which we look at the world to be a pointer, to be an encouragement for us to come back to the reality of what's actually happening. Thank you very much for bringing that in, Norma. Jay Bowen makes a comment. Thank you, Jay. The anger and passion inside is like a lava exploding from a volcano. Yeah, isn't it just like that? Quite remarkable, really, how nature and the nature within one can see many ways in which we can compare and find similarities internally and externally. When we're experiencing different kinds of emotion, they can certainly have qualities of the four elements associated with them. When I'm depressed, feeling sluggish, lack of energy, it's like a predominance of earth element is there, heaviness, tendency towards stillness and inactivity. And what can be helpful is to notice that and then to bring in other elements to balance it out. Bring in some air element, movement, get up, and just any kind of movement at all will help to rebalance and lighten up the load of the predominance of earth element. And with fire element, we have the whole temperature range, but we can, when there's a predominance of fire element, there's a lot of passion and heat or anger, then we can consider bringing in water element, the coolness, the qualities of water element, a flow, allowing things to flow through. We can literally, if we're feeling very passionate, right, people will go and take a cold shower, water element, and also the other end of the spectrum of temperature to cool down the heat. Have a glass of water. If one is angry, count to 10, bring in air element, the mentality, counting, taking us away from the heat and emotion of anger. Counting to 10, diverting the ways of thinking, bringing in air element, but even better to bring in water element. Have a drink of water. Cool down. Go and splash water on the face. These are ways in which we can balance fire element with water element. Often earth element is well balanced with air element. If we're very airy, we're very agitated, thinking a lot, restless, then we want to bring in the earth element. Sit down, be still, relax, and so forth. We'll have something to eat, earth element predominantly. And so there are many ways in which our contemplation of the elements can kind of help us to notice how we can provide remedies for imbalances, both physically, also emotionally. Thank you, Jay, for the simile of the volcano. Meditate like fire. Absolutely, Norma. Let's do that. Let's be like fire. Let's not discriminate. Any kind of sense of reactivity that arises, liking or disliking, let's just allow it to burn up, let it go. There's another sutta where the Buddha gives a simile of the refining of gold. Many of you will be familiar with this. He compares our practice to like a goldsmith who takes the gold in a crucible, puts it in the furnace and lets it burn. And when the gold is burning, any impurities that are there will fall away, will come out, will burn up. And then you're left in the end with the refined, the pure, the really quality gold. And in a way, this is a great simile, a fire simile for our practice, this refinement. Let the flame of our bright effort, of our spiritual energy, of our sense of urgency, these qualities can be seen as like a fire. Let the fire of our spiritual urgency, this tejo, tejasa, the atape, let this spiritual urgency, this fire, burn up the defilements. Don't allow ourselves to get caught up in reactivity, but rather keep the flame burning of this spiritual ardency that cuts through all the reactivity. Let's go and keep purifying the heart, refining the heart in this way. So fire can purify, says Norma. Absolutely. Yeah. And Jay Bowen, last comment, I think, for today. Says, so fire can be negative, like greed, hatred, and delusion burning, but also positive, like being unaffected by bad or unclean things. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. We can see it in many different ways, can't we? This the similes of fire are many, and to see fire, yes, indeed, in the suttas there are teachings around fire as a something negative to be put out, to be extinguished, and also the fire, as I was just speaking of, one could say spiritual ardency is like a fire, and this is the fire to tend. This is the sacred flame that we want to keep alight, actually. And so in many ways we can enjoy, the very varied teachings of the Buddha on fire. And for me, I feel that there is above all, two stand out for me. One is the fire sermon, where, as here, Jay, we can see that the Buddha's saying, look, we need to recognize the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. And in the recognition of them, we will start to be not providing any more fuel for these fires. These fires will have a chance to slowly but surely go out. This beautiful teaching stands out for me. And the second one that I find particularly helpful is to contemplate fire elements, to come back to the experience of the moment and see how it is that fire is manifesting here. Sense of the temperature, the digestion, the vitality of the body. Some parts of the body cool, some parts of the body warm. And just to allow this very beautiful doorway into simply arriving and being here for this present moment experience. Thank you, friends, for your kind attention and for this opportunity. May you all be well, and may your practice go very well. I'd like to finish with 3 sadhus for our teacher, the Buddha. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.